Now for a game demonstrating some of White's positional ideas in the symmetrical pawn structure which arises after d takes e5, d takes e5. This was a game from the World Team Championship between Movsesian and Onishchuk. So Movsesian picks the Ruy Lopez. You'll also frequently see him playing the Joko piano. And actually the position which ultimately arose here is perhaps more similar to the Joko piano than the Ruy Lopez. So after a6, bishop a4, knight c6, castles, c5, c3, b5, bishop b3, d6, d4, bishop b6, and now Movsesian went for bishop e3. Bishop g4, knight bd2, castles, h3, and bishop h5. So this has all been played a number of times. There was a game between Karyakin and Shirov, which preceded bishop g5. It's also from 2011, I think, in Wikanzi. E takes d4, now bishop d5, which resulted in kind of an unbalanced endgame after these moves. So bishop takes f6, takes, queen takes e4, rook fe1, queen f5, knight h4. So Movsesian notes that he didn't want to go in for this this particular endgame, and instead opted for what seems to be a very straightforward move, but one which ends up posing black some problems, I think. Onishchuk recaptured directly. One would presume that he wasn't so happy with the idea of this, in particular because as well as f takes g7, there's always going to be an idea of bishop d5 hitting the knight, which is pinned to the rook. So d takes e5 is more sensible. Queen e2, queen e7, rook ft1. Now all of this is very sensible. Queen e6, b4, bishop takes e3, takes with the queen. And now black played rook fd8, which Movsesian criticizes as being quite a significant mistake, and instead he suggests that if black were to take on f3 first, and then rook d8, he wouldn't have so much to worry about. I think this is the kind of subtlety which Movsesian probably understands better than anyone, because this is, like I say, very much a Joko piano type of position. But after rook fd8, which looks very sensible, in fact, White is able to take and play knight e1, and now we see that this bishop is not really doing anything, while the knight can very effectively come to c5 and put pressure on the a6 pawn. So this position already looks quite critical for black. So black played queen c6, f3 defending e4, and continued his knight tour. And now that black knight came back to d7 to cover knight c5, but after knight c5 anyway, takes and takes, just the passivity of this bishop is continually being re-emphasized. For instance, if black were to take here, this position is just extremely unpleasant. With this permanent weakness on a6, the rook is out of play. For instance, b4, and then this knight can come in to e3 with threats of coming into d5 or f5. White could consider also moving this rook off the a file, although I'd be reluctant to move the rook given how well placed it is. But in any event, Onishchuk tried to just sit tight with f6, knight e3, bishop f7. But now after knight f5, he found himself compelled to take on c5 because rook e6 isn't really an option in view of knight e7. But now after takes and rook e6, knight e3, again the bishop has managed to bring itself back to a more active diagonal, but black continues to suffer from his weak pawn on a6, the weak square on d5, which the white knight can occupy, and the position remains very unpleasant. King f8, b4, rook c6, and now g4. So white can choose his moment to play knight d5 if he wants, or to play some other plan. For the moment, he's just gaining additional kingside space. So h5, king f2, h4, and then knight d5. Of course, that can't be taken because the rook will be trapped. So white controls that outpost very well. After g5, king e3, king e8. It might look as though black has assembled something of a fortress, but the problem is that white still has a pawn break with this pawn to c4, which is going to disrupt black's defences. And Mosesian manages to effect this very efficiently. He plays rook d1, king f8, king d3, bishop e6, and now c4. So just exchanging off that key pawn and leaving black still with his weakness on a6. And after king f7, rook a1, bishop d7. In fact, a very elegant finish to the game, b5 takes and king b4. So white has temporarily sacrificed the pawn, but in exchange his rook is going to penetrate through to a7. And again, this bishop is still horribly passive and not doing anything, as is the rook. So after bishop e8, rook a7, black resigned because the c7 pawn is dropping, followed by the d5 pawn in short order. So Onisyuk is a slightly unfortunate player on the black side of some of these Italian game positions. I remember a game he played with black against Michael Adams, where Michael Adams managed to demonstrate a number of very key ideas as well. But here, just a really interesting example of how knowledge of one strategic concept, namely that this light square bishop can be quite passively placed on the king side, was sufficient for Mosesian to generate a very strong, strategically promising position, which he then exploited very efficiently.